Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I am your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Let's Get Biblical Q&A with Rabbi Tovia Singer. Welcome back, Rabbi. It's always a pleasure.
Great to be back.
Absolutely. All right, so we're going to get this thing started here pretty quickly here. Just want to let everybody know to get your questions called in because we are ready for you. I've got a little small talk to do with our sweet Rebbe. It's always, I wish I could record our fun conversations we have while off the air.
Yeah, because the show we do off air is much funnier and much more interesting on air. Something happens where it's not me. I'm always interesting. But William just is so much more interesting off air. In fact, off air, we should be reversing.
That's
and I should
funny.
be just handling calls, and William should be addressing them. Unfortunately, the show wouldn't last very long that way. But anyways, do call in. And
yes.
What's the number?
Number's on your screen, 855-MetaShare. Okay, everybody who knows this show long enough knows that that's a heck of a joke. I've even got voicemail on the call-in number. They have to listen to my message, which talks about the Bible Q&A and all this other stuff, and they still leave messages that say, I'm calling to get insurance. Is this MetaShare? And I'm thinking, the only thing I can think of is that they're in denial. They saw the number advertised somewhere and they got it wrong, but they think it's the right number, and they have so much faith. My gosh, this sounds so much like one of our topics. They have so much faith. They're in denial whenever they find out this is really not MetaShare. I wasn't leaning towards Christianity on that, but it sort of turned into that. But hey, that's all right though. Okay, I have a question for you that I need to have addressed. As soon as my memory kicks in, I'll tell you what that question was. I literally had it on my brain like 2 minutes ago.
You know, if you ate more fish, which is brain food.
Listen, I love fish.
This issue would not be
I absolutely love fish, like you wouldn't even imagine. Oh gosh, what in the world was it, man? We're really going to rely on some fun topics right now.
The phones are open now.
The phones are open, 855-95-BIBLE, and someone's calling in right now. Thank you. You saved my minute. All right. Welcome. Thank you for calling in. Welcome. You're live on the air. Do you have a question for Rabbi Singer? And no, we don't sell MetaShare. I don't hear anybody, by the way. Let me see.
Because you got to put that plug in. There's a plug. There's a wire. There's one wire.
Well, actually, no. There. Let's see if this.
There it is.
There. Hello. Welcome. You are live on the air. Tell us your name. Where you're calling from, please.
Hi, William. My name is Jenny, and I'm from Northeast Illinois.
Hi, Jenny. I heard Northeast somewhere, but then you're breaking up really bad. Is it maybe due to a bad signal? I'm not sure.
Okay, can you hear me now?
That sounds better. Go right ahead. Yes.
Okay. I'm from Northeast part of Illinois.
Oh, very good. Welcome.
Oh.
And it is an honor to speak to both of you. I have a quick question.
Okay.
Is the Torah only for the Jews? That is Exodus 15, Leviticus 19, Numbers 15, and so on, Deuteronomy 30. What scriptures say that the righteous non-Jews are included too?
All right, very good. Sounds like a really good question. We'll go ahead and take care of it. Why don't you go ahead and hang up now, and you can tune in for your answer, okay? You've about a 10-15 second lag in the video, okay? Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, very good. All right, Rabbi, take it away.
Thank you. That's a great question.
It is.
But as it turns out, we don't even get to righteous Jews until we get, Jews, until we get to the book of Exodus, meaning the people who the Torah identifies specifically as righteous, example, Noah. Noah the Torah says in Genesis chapter 6, that he was a righteous man. I don't mean to always bring in Christianity, but I think a lot of people watch this show. In Christian theology, that would be impossible. But as it turns out, Noah was a righteous person. As it turns out, Noah was not Jewish. As it turns out, Abraham was not Jewish. He was a Mesopotamian. I granted that the book of Genesis is teasing out people from the royal family to have a nation that will be produced from the loins of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And once that nation is inaugurated, is blessed, as we see in Genesis 48 and 49, so then we can get going and inaugurate the nation. And then we have many, many mitzvot that are binding upon the Jewish people. However, the nations of the world had commandments long before the Torah was given at Mount Sinai. And for that reason, when people did not live according to God's will and violated those commandments, they were held, they were judged. When powerful men raped weak women and forced them to bear their children, they were punished severely for that. For other crimes of violence and murder, there were consequences for that. When Abraham lived roughly 4,000 years ago. The Torah was given roughly 3,300 years ago. It is true that the promise that there would be a unique nation that would emerge from Avraham Avinu, we encounter long before Genesis 18. But Abraham is, I'm going to use a term that's frequently used, is bargaining with Hashem. Perhaps there are 50 righteous people in Sodom, a city that's about to be destroyed. Well, so the point is there are all sorts of commandments that were given to Noah right from the creation of mankind and given to Adam earlier on. We find some of those commandments listed in Genesis chapter 9, v'chula v'chula. So the Torah, however, is uniquely given to the Jewish people, but the nations would always be very aware of it. We're told that explicitly in Deuteronomy 4. All the nations would say, what a wise Torah this is, what a wise nation this is, that it would have such a Torah in their midst. And as it turns out, the children of Israel, the Bnei Israel today, are not very large a number. How many people are there that are self-identifying Jews? 15 million. Most of them, I don't think, are religious or observant. So there are millions of Torah-observant Jews that are loyal to Hashem. And they have the Jewish people have a unique role in the world, and that is to be an Or LaGoyim, a light to the nations. Isaiah 49, verse 6. Isaiah 42, verse 6. In fact, we're a Brit Am, a covenant nation. We are enjoined by HaKadosh Baruch Hu right before the Ten Commandments in Exodus chapter 19 to be a mamleches kohanim v'goy kodesh, which means a kingdom of priests, v'goy kodesh, and a holy nation. Li kol eretz, the whole world belongs to me. That means the Jewish people are enjoined to somehow, in some way, not in the Christian way, but in a way, to get that message out to the world by eliminating darkness through the spreading of light by keeping the Torah. So therefore, the Torah is given to the children of Israel, and the children of Israel, unless they have a special command from Hashem, like in the book of Jonah, Jonah is given a unique command for that time at that moment to go to the city of Nineveh. The children of Israel, by observing the Torah, it spreads the light to the entire world. The whole world receives light when the Klal Yisrael are doing their job. Conversely, when the Bnei Israel are turning against Hashem and are not following Him, what the effect that has is striking, because it causes the non-Jews who are supposed to be fed the light of Torah, it causes them to turn away from Hashem, and in turn, anti-Semitism, meaning Jew hatred, emerges from that. That's why the Jews suffer from the Goyim. The reason why Jewish people suffer from Goyim is because we're not doing our job. It's an interesting thing. Around the world, we can observe there are many natural disasters that inflict a tremendous amount of suffering upon the nations of the world. Tremendous. Even the country I lived in for a long time, Indonesia, tremendous suffering there. But generally speaking, it's very rare that the Bnei Yisrael suffer from natural forces. It's very unusual. Other nations do, but Klal Yisrael, this is not outside of Eretz Yisrael. And the reason for this is that when the Bnei Yisrael are punished, we're punished because we fail to do our job among the nations of the world. We fail to spread Torah to them, and therefore Hashem wants to remind us that you're not doing your job adequately, that you have to bring Torah to the world. And as it says in the book of Psalms, Magid Devorav Yaakov, this is the end of Psalm 147, that just as a backup, the prophet is telling us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave words, that's written in oral Torah, to the Jewish people. The nations of the world are not familiar with these laws, and that's what it says, Magid Devorav Yaakov. He gave his words, plural, to Jacob, Chukav u'mishpatav liYisrael, his laws and commands to Klal Yisrael. The Almighty has not done that with any other nation, and therefore mishpatim ba'yodum, they don't understand the commandments. So it's very important that Klal Yisrael take an active role in spreading the light to the world, and as a result, the world is going to drink that light, and many people, if they'll allow that light to come in, will benefit greatly. And that's also, there are many people who are from the nations of the world who reject that light. They go, no, we want to teach the Jews that they should join our religion. This is the worst thing they can do. They're in a complete rebellion against HaKadosh Baruch Hu when they do that. So there's the answer to the question. Jews have that role to be the priests of the world, the Kohen to the world. Kohen not in the sense of a descent of Aaron, but those who are the teachers of the world. Thank you for your question.
Okay, we'll go and move on. I had another follow-up, but I'm going to pass it up because we've got a caller right now. So, caller, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Oh, hello?
Yes.
My name is Oliver from Taiwan.
Oliver, welcome.
Hey. First, I'd like to quickly thank you, Rabbi Singer and William. You guys run an amazing show. It's really amazing.
Thank you.
My question today concerns Numbers 35:32. My friend and I have arguments about religion all the time, and he tells me that the death of the high priest atones for sin, and that this is a so-called type of Jesus, that this is actually a Jewish idea. So my question is, does the death of the high priest really atone for sin, and how can we understand Numbers 35? Thanks, Rabbi Singer. Your work is very important.
That is a really excellently, very good placed, very well placed. Great topic. Okay, go ahead and hang up now, and you can tune in for your answer.
Thank you.
You bet. Bye. I like it especially whenever when Christian has claims and they point out specific places, even though it's not right or it is whatever the case may be. It's more enjoyable for me to learn whenever you have a place to point with the claim that you're making, and that's a really good place to look at. So Numbers 35:32, if I heard that correctly.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Take it away.
So what I say to people is, why not just look at the original passage? Like, why not go to what the what the passage says, and of course the passages that introduce it. That means the Torah doesn't say that anywhere. First, so let's provide a context here, or else because people are listening going, what is he talking about? But people go, oh, Rabbi Singer, I think you're wonderful. I think it is. I'm really not all that wonderful. All I do is I just say, here, look, take a look what it says, and that's it. So the Torah raises a case of a person who murders someone, but he does so accidentally. So it's a negligent homicide. What happens to such a person? How is it dealt with? Moreover, the case, for example, would be if someone had fashioned an axe and the head of the axe was not properly attached to the handle, and the person is chopping wood and the head of the axe goes flying. And chas v'chalila, and the head of the axe goes and strikes another person and kills him. The man, on one hand, didn't intend to kill anyone, but on the other hand, he was acting in a way that was reckless, meaning he should have made sure that the head of the axe is properly attached to the handle. There's nowhere that it says in Numbers 35 that when the high priest dies, the person's sin has been atoned for. But so you go, oh, I guess it doesn't say that. Now, there are other things the Torah is dealing with, and that's what's called an Ir Miklat. So there were many cities called a city of refuge. One of them is in what is today the Golan Heights. So a city of refuge means that this is what could happen. At the moment the person kills another because of reckless homicide. Okay, reckless homicide. So the family wants to avenge the blood of what happened. This guy went and killed. So there is a place, a safe place where he can run. And in fact, in Eretz Israel, there were signs everywhere how to get to a city of refuge. Everywhere. Because the person had to flee. Okay. Now, did this person act in a way that was careless? Of course he did. But he didn't intend to murder anyone. There was no intent. It wasn't a first-degree murder, talking American law, where there was a plan to murder. Second-degree murder, it wasn't that. But it was acting recklessly. So in such a case, the person can't be executed because he didn't intend to kill anybody. But we have to drive home to this person who acted recklessly the message: you did a horrible thing. You deserve to die if you would have committed an act of murder, premeditated murder. That's a capital offense. But we don't. But in every civilized country, mens rea, which means intent, is everything. So if a person didn't intend to kill anyone, so then the punishment is not the death penalty. But it's not like you suddenly come back to your synagogue and you're given shlishi, the third, you're not called up to the Torah, given all the honors of the world. You're a nightmare. You really should have been put to death if you would have. If you did the same thing, throw an axe handle at someone's head and killed him, that's the death penalty. But you didn't intend to it. You didn't intend to carry out this act. And as a result of it, intent in Jewish law, and this Jewish law of intent is so important that it affects in every country I know of, every civilized country. Intent is everything on these kinds of issues. On other issues, intent doesn't matter, but on these kinds of issues, intent matters, whether it's in American law, Canadian, they all have adopted Torah law, this Torah view of what is the intent. So the Torah says the following: the person who committed this act has to he can't go back home. You can't go back home and just be a regular guy again. Can't do that. You have to realize you did something very serious. So you go to a city of refuge in your miklot, and what happened? You can't go back get your stuff. You're there. You're stuck there. And then when the priest dies, so then the person can go back to his home, restore his life, get his life back in order, and no one could touch him anymore. That means it's done. Doesn't say anywhere that the high priest died for his sins. This is all nonsense. Nowhere it says that. But it does say that the person can return, has to dwell in the city of refuge until the priest died. And of course, imagine the knock on the door when he's living somewhere in some town that's designed for this, you get a knock on the door and there it is. They're carrying the casket of the priest. So of course it hits the guy in the heart and realize that you should have been put to death for this act. You weren't, because your intent wasn't there. And therefore now you can go back home, and no member of the family that sought to avenge this death could touch you. That's all. So there's not one word anywhere that your sin has been forgiven as a result of this. There are many such examples like this in Tanakh where it is, but it isn't. And this helps us understand something, that there's such a difference between intent and no intent. And when the intent isn't there, let's take Leviticus chapter 4. It's unintentional. So those sins are dealt with in one way. You want to get the message across, but we don't treat someone who commits a sin unintentionally, recklessly, but unintentionally, in the same way. Leviticus chapter 5, or 6, we have the case of the Korban Asham, where the person did something wrong, but he then confessed his sin. Could be knowing or unknowing. But by confessing it, it mitigates against the seriousness of the original act. So everybody, it's not like Tovia Singer is some genius, or I have access to some sort of text that no one else does. I have secret passages. I don't. All you have to do is just take a deep breath. Everybody, go back to what it says. The text simply says the person has to go. It's like a prison. Meaning the Miklot, the cities of refuge, was a prison, and you're there until the high priest died. Now, the priest didn't die for you. He died because he was 99 years old, 120 years old. Does it send a message? You better believe it. Could he now go back and return back to his house and recollect all of his belongings? Yes, that's the point. There's nothing there that atones for sin. Just go back and read the text on your own. Anyways, thank you very much for your question.
All right, very good. We're going to take the next caller. Caller, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
This is Bonnie Miller. I'm from San Antonio, Texas.
Hi, Bonnie. Haven't seen or heard from you in a while. Good to hear you.
Oh, well, a couple of weeks, but Shalom, William. Shalom, Rabbi.
Shalom.
Shalom.
And I was, I've been talking to a young man, and he has raised a few questions for me that I was wondering about. And I was wondering about how and when the prophets wrote down their prophecies. I mean, did somebody follow them around and write all this stuff down as it was happening? Did they go back home and immediately write it down? Was it years later that they wrote it down? You know, I'm trying to put things into perspective.
Can I ask you a question before I answer? Just a question, because I want to get to know you a little bit. What? I'm not challenging. I want to answer that question, but what difference would it make? I mean, what would be the consequences of what the answer would be, if any?
Okay, well, this young man is, he's an atheist, okay? And he tells me that he doesn't believe in God. I've told him that that the Jewish people are the perfect example that shows that there has to be a God, just simply because something had to have happened at Mount Sinai for them to stick with the Torah through all the diaspora and all the suffering that the Jews have endured. We've talked about because I happen to be reading through the prophets right now, but we've talked about the prophets, and he kind of thinks that that somebody just wrote this stuff down, that it wasn't really real.
Just made it up.
Of course somebody wrote it down. That means what I want to do with you, Bonnie, stay with me on this, because I don't want to address. I mean, of course the prophets wrote it down. The fact that the prophets recorded it, why is that consequential?
No, she's saying that they made it up, that it was just they just came up with their own creativity and made this stuff.
But the question is, how were they recorded? It means whether they wrote it or a scribe wrote it on their behalf. The question is not how did pen get to paper. The question is, do we believe what's written in the paper? So those are two entirely different questions, but I'll seek to address that. But all right, I mean, does that make sense, Bonnie? I mean, the question is not.
Yes.
The question really is, you're not really. Let me just for a second, Mamala. I think you're not. The question, therefore, is not how did pen get to paper. The question is, can we trust what was written? And that's really quite a different question, don't you think?
I think it is. I think you're correct on that. But also, what he does, he looks everything up on the internet, and he's there's some discrepancies on timeline.
But that's a different kind of question. That's a different question. Why would we see discrepancies? So that's the thing, is that sometimes I'm going to answer your question now, okay? But those are all sorts of different types of questions that could be asked.
Okay, Bonnie, go ahead and hang up now, and you can tune in for the answer now, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Rabbi.
All right.
Thank you, Rabbi.
So, thank you, dear.
You bet.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
dear. Hashem should watch over you. It's important to just to organize what the real question is, and sometimes what's articulated is not the real question. So, in almost all cases, not in all cases, but in almost all cases, the prophet would record what he had preached. And what is very unique about the Jewish scriptures is that they happen, not always, but very frequently, in a very public event, and the events that unfold affect the nation. Isaiah, as an example, he had a very long prophetic career that spans probably about more than 80 years, because Yeshayahu's prophetic career begins with Uzziyahu, right in the middle of Uzziyahu's lifetime, when Uzziyahu got leprosy, and it goes all the way to Menashe, and he was killed by his grandson. But that's an enormous amount of time. That's Uzziyahu, Yotam, Achaz, Chizkiyahu. It's a huge amount of time. So the prophets recorded what they had preached. It was understood by all around that these were true prophets, with some exceptions. We'll talk about that in a moment. But the prophets were known to be prophets in two ways. Number one, they everything they taught was consistent with the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. No prophet was able to teach anything that was against the Torah. He couldn't add to the Torah nor take away. That's why Deuteronomy 13 verse 1 in a Jewish Bible begins with which is the chapter that begins to talk about false prophets. The first verse is don't add, don't take away from the Torah. The Christian church, our good friends, they shove that verse to the end of Deuteronomy chapter 12 instead of leaving it where it belongs, the beginning of Deuteronomy 13 verse 1. But so number one, prophet, no matter what he does, what miracles he does, if he in any way abrogates the Torah and says there's a mitzvah you don't have to keep anymore, false, out. He could do all kinds of magic tricks. He can resurrect the dead. He can anything you want to. Pick a card, any card. Torah says even if it happens, can't listen to him. And why does Hashem allow false prophets to do miracles? I'm only testing you to see if you really love me. That's the whole chapter 13 is about. If your brother, the son of your mother, rises up and seeks to seduce you away from the Torah, don't listen to him, nothing. Now we can move fast forward to Deuteronomy 18. The prophet has to be able to tell you what's going to happen, and he has to somehow perform some sort of miracle, and it is established then that he has, so you must follow that prophet. And if you don't, HaKadosh Baruch Hu required of you. See Deuteronomy 18, verse 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, very, very important, okay? Now, how is it recorded? So we see very often that we had, that the prophets wrote it. Sometimes they wrote it, and what they wrote didn't last very long, and the writing got thrown into a fire. In the case of Jeremiah is very famous because Jeremiah was living in a time with a king who was a nightmare, who was rejecting the teachings of what Jeremiah was conveying from Hashem. Don't ask. It was a nightmare. In fact, Jeremiah is constantly dealing with false prophets around him, people claiming to be speaking in the name of Hashem, and they weren't. And Jeremiah was only fully recognized as a prophet after the first temple was destroyed. Then everyone realized, many people realized they made a terrible, terrible mistake. Isaiah, in terms of how it was recorded, is very interesting. So Yeshaya preached, and those preachings he recorded, but it was not recorded together as we have it now in the 66th chapter. And the reason is that ordinarily a prophet would record and assemble his sefer, his work, during his lifetime. However, Yeshayahu, the prophet Isaiah, was murdered before he had a chance to assemble everything. Everybody knew who Yeshaya was. Nobody questioned. Unlike Jeremiah, everybody knew that Yeshayahu, Isaiah, was Isaiah. But as it turns out, he was killed. He was a very old man. He had lived a very long life, but he was murdered. And therefore, Chizkiyahu and his companions assembled Isaiah's prophecies and gave it to us as we have it. Chizkiyahu, Hezekiah, and his companions were responsible not only for assembling Isaiah's prophecies into the Sefer we have it. Hezekiah is not any king. The Navi tells us that Chizkiyahu HaMelech was the most righteous king that ever lived, a Davidic king that lived before him or after. He was a giant. He was a towering giant. We also know that Chizkiyahu HaMelech, it says so in the book of Proverbs, that Hezekiah also assembled many of the Proverbs of King Solomon in the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs is actually divided into many sections, and a third the way in, it says these are the Proverbs that Chizkiyahu and his companions assembled. That means it was recorded, but people did not organize it together. Chizkiyahu was able to do that with his companions. Now, one other thing about the Nevi'im, and that is there were many more Nevi'im than those who we know of through Tanakh. There are really hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Nevi'im. Actually, there was, according to our tradition, 1.2 million Nevi'im, Kiflayim Kiyotzim Mitzrayim, twice as many that went out of Egypt. So it was over 1 million people who had prophecy. But we don't have a record of what they wrote. So this is a very important point as well. There was a second stage that I didn't mention yet, and that is that you had Nevi'im who preached to their generation, but it was recognized by Chazal, particularly the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the Great Assembly. This was an assembly of 120 prophets that lived at the end of the First Temple period through the Babylonian exile and in the beginning of the Second Temple period. So they would sort out, here we have a writing of a prophet, but it's not nitnu l'doros, which means it's not relevant to future generations. There were many prophets that were addressing issues and problems of a generation that existed, but it had no consequences for future generations. So those prophecies would not include in Tanakh. Now, most people hear that, they go, huh? So I guess some guys didn't make it. That's the wrong way to look at it. I mean, some people, some prophets, shouldn't call them guys, that's not respectful. Some prophets, their writings didn't make it into Tanakh, the canon. But it's not the right way to look at it. Way you want to look at that is, rather, it's reverse it. And that is that every word in Tanakh is nitnu l'doros, is relevant to all future generations. So that means that if you're reading the Navi and you're going, but what does this have to do with me? That means you don't understand what he's talking about. And then you have to say, oh, Hashem, please, you're the one who bequeaths wisdom. Please give me the wisdom to understand it. So this is very important that you could be reading a text from the Navi, and you go, how does this relate to me? So it means, and believe me, of all the things that I struggled with over the years to elucidate, to understand a text, is how is this relevant to our generation today? And if until you understand it, it means you don't get the full force is what is happening. One other point about looms very large into what the caller asked. This is a little complicated. It might be, and I'm going to try. HaKadosh Baruch Hu give me the wisdom to explain it properly. When the Torah was given to Moshe Rabbeinu wrote whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him. Every word in the Torah is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher, Olav HaShalom, had no creative influence over what it says in the Torah. And it was given a priori. When the Torah was given to Moshe Rabbeinu, it was given for all future generations. That was, the Torah was no part of the 5 books of Moses was relevant only to the generation that received it, but rather it was right from the get-go, forever and ever. And the Torah should not leave your lips. V'higisa b'yom v'layla. You should meditate on it day and night. That's how the book of Joshua opens up. The Torah, unlike the other prophets, was given at the time for all future, for every moment in history. I don't understand this verse in the Torah, and how does it relate to me today? Good. That means you have to dig a little bit deeper. That's the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. The Nevi'im, in contrast, listen, this is a little deep, So listen carefully. The Vehement Contrast, that means the other prophets who followed Moses, and Moses' prophecy is the highest order of prophecy. No one ever can attain that level of prophecy. The prophets that followed Moshe Rabbeinu Olav HaShalom, they were speaking to that generation. That means when they were writing, generally speaking, they weren't thinking, I'm writing for the generation in front of me and for future generations. Not at all. They were writing for the audience in front of them. And what happens is there is a second layer of teasing out where the Chazal, which are made up of prophets themselves, were able to tease out, are these prophecies, in fact, relevant to all future generations? Obviously, a great deal of it, it's very obvious that it is. It didn't require there was no conflict at all. But this is the key. When Jeremiah, Olav HaShalom, when Yirmiyahu wrote that sefer, he was thinking of the generation at the end of the First Temple period. That's who he's writing to. Got it? But Ezra, who authored Sefer Divrei Hayamim, the book of Chronicles, which is divided into two, he's not thinking of the generation at the end of the First Temple period. Rather, he's thinking about the Shovei Tzion. This is very important. This is so important, Kindlech. I can't tell you. I'll explain to you the consequences of this are staggering. Ezra HaSefer, who's the giant of the generation, he was the Gadol Hador, he was the giant of Torah of the generation, of the early Second Temple period. He was the Torah scholar of the generation. It's so interesting because even though Ezra was a Navi in a sense, we don't really have any stories of him receiving Nevuah. Ezra was a priest. He was a Kohen. We have nothing in the Tanakh talking about Ezra doing any Kohen things. Only the Navi wants you to know that Ezra was the giant of Torah. That's it. That's all you need to know about him. It doesn't mean he never did anything else. Torah is not interested in it. Tanakh is not interested in anything else about Ezra except he was the Torah giant. He was the authority of his generation. Ezra is writing to who? Who is his audience? Remember what I told you earlier. His audience is what's called the Shovei Tzion, which means the generation that had returned to Eretz Yisrael after the end of the Babylonian exile. He actually doesn't show up immediately, but it's a few years later. There are waves of Jews from Bavel, from Babylon, who are returning to Eretz Yisrael to rebuild it. The first wave is the most famous wave, and that's a wave of 42,360 Jews. And they weren't the best Jews. The early Zionists were not so religious. How do I know? Because it says so in the Navi. Why would the Navi want us to know that the early Zionists were not so religious? You don't have to. Today, I might give you a little bit of insight. There were other waves, and in fact, we're not introduced to Ezra himself until the 7th chapter of the book of Ezra. I'm not kidding. Now, this goes to the contradiction part. And listen up, listen real good. Like, whatever else you're doing, you're not. Therefore, Ezra, when writing the book of Chronicles, is not interested in the things that are mentioned in Samuel and Kings. Why? Because it's not relevant to his generation. What is he seeking to do? He's seeking to strengthen his generation. He wants them to know that even though you don't have a king, for example, the Davidic Dynasty is going to be restored in its full glory and greater than you can imagine. And that's why in the genealogical record of the Davidic Dynasty, there's a lot that's devoted to it. Another example is that Ezra is not interested in rehashing all the mistakes that King Solomon made. or King David made. There's no mention of Bathsheba and that whole event that we see in the book of Samuel. Why? Because that's not relevant to those who returning to build the second temple. Because the goal of Yirmiyahu is to explain why the first temple was destroyed. So he's dialing back. Okay, my friends, here's all the mistakes, the record of every crazy mistake that was made. Here it is. The Book of Chronicles the Book of Chronicles is not interested in that. The Book of Chronicles is interested in letting you know that even though the second Beis Hamikdash, we call now the second temple, was built, but as it turns out, the full glory isn't there. We have leaders from the house of David. We do. But they're not kings. There's no legitimate king during the second temple. But I want you to know that the Davidic Dynasty is intact, and it's all going to happen. And therefore, there's great focus on the Davidic Dynasty, and there's nothing in Chronicles that interests the author Ezra to sit and discuss about Shlomo Melech marrying women who he shouldn't have. The daughter of Pharaoh. Now, she is mentioned in Chronicles, but it's just kilach yad. It's sort of in a very passing way. It's just not, you want to know about it? No one's hiding anything, but Ezra is interested in conveying in Divrei Hayamim about the restoration, and it's happening, and ultimately it contains a roadmap to the Messianic age. In fact, I did a film on this, on the Book of Chronicles, and how it is a roadmap to the Messianic age. So this is very important. So therefore, Ezra is just not interested in things that Jeremiah is. Jeremiah is going to emphasize the mistakes, and it's not that Ezra is whitewashing. That means he doesn't want people to know about it, because Jeremiah is the word of God. Ezra is saying, but we need to shed light for this generation because you guys are returning now and you think it's all over. And this temple does not look anything remotely like the first temple. And you think maybe it's all over and this is a nightmare and the glory is never coming back. I want you to know it is. Even though now it's not open and so on. So therefore, another example, just to our contradictions and variances, is that the book of Kings, written by Jeremiah, ends with the Churban Bayis Rishon, ends with the destruction of the first temple. There's nothing there about Cyrus. There's nothing there about the restoration. And Jeremiah's not written for that reason. Jeremiah is there to tell you what is bad. You know, there is a disease, chas v'chalila, no one should ever have it, that people don't feel pain. It's one of the most dangerous things in the world. There is a machla, I don't remember the name of it, that a person, mamish, could touch something very hot and doesn't feel it. Person's body doesn't. Now, we think of pain as a bad thing. Pain is, Baruch Hashem, I feel pain. If you ever burn yourself, chas v'chalila, you go, thank you, Hashem, that you put in me this thing that it's like an alarm. I remember what it was. I remember once my leg hurt me in a certain way. So I was talking to a doctor. He said, if your leg hurts you, oh yeah, I slipped coming out of the shower. He said, I remember the doctor said something that was so simple. He said, if your leg hurts when you do that, don't do it. Your leg is saying, don't do it, because you're damaging it. It's damaged. As it turns out, I actually had torn a hamstring, and it's enormously painful. I just can't tell you, but it's just unbelievably painful. I never knew what it was, but when it happened, I knew I was in trouble. I knew that's what it was, even though I never knew what a hamstring was. I heard of it because athletes got it, but I just didn't know what it was. But I remember I was talking to a doctor. The doctor said, if your body is saying it hurts, that means your body's saying, don't do that, because you're injuring yourself. So that's in the same exact way, the Tanakh is an instruction manual for life, how to live your life. Sometimes things are not obvious. They're not apparent. There are times when it doesn't seem like there should be a problem doing this. Nobody's there to tell you, don't do it. Don't do it. That's all. Now, at different tekufos, which means at different epochs in history, there were different problems that confronted the generation. So the text was written down by a prophet. In some cases, the prophets, in this case, Chizkiyahu, Hezekiah, had to assemble everything that Isaiah wrote. As I said, these things usually are not material of who actually assembled it. So it was Chizkiyahu in that case. The key is that Yeshaya is writing for his generation. That's who he has in mind. And then that has to pass another test to be in Tanakh, and that is, if it was only written for that generation and it's not relevant to it, it doesn't get included. Incidentally, that also explains why Isaiah only has 66 chapters. You really think Yeshayahu preached 66 chapters in his life? That's ridiculous. He preached for much more. The other things didn't go into Tanakh. Why? Because they weren't nitnuladayers. They were not relevant to future generations. Those that were included. But that is why we see in Chronicles, as an example, an emphasis on certain matters that are ignored in the Book of Kings, and there are certain things that are in the Book of Kings that Book of Chronicles is just not interested in. Why? It's just not relevant now. Now we have another huge problem. It's just not that problem. Each prophet, incidentally, had a different type of prophecy, not a different message, chas v'chalila, but in the days of Isaiah, the problem of unbelief was not a serious problem because people were religious. We can see it from the first chapter, people were davening every day. The problem was social justice. In the days of Elijah and Elisha, it was the problem really of unbelief, so they were miracle workers. Anyway, so that is the methodology, how it was recorded, and how it is in Tanakh. And I hope that sheds light on why you even need the Book of Chronicles. That means, what do I need Chronicles for? I already have Samuel and Kings. The answer is that it's very important to see the record as is given to those who return to build the second temple. And that, of course, then explains another contradiction. Why does Chronicles end with this very important message about Cyrus? Kings doesn't mention Cyrus because Kings not interested in Cyrus. You want to know about Cyrus? You could go to Isaiah 45. That means this is very important. No one's covering up anything. You want to know about Cyrus? The Jews knew to go to Yeshaya. That was written many years before Jeremiah. And then you have Isaiah 44 and 45, especially 45. Kings is not interested in Cyrus. He's interested in smacking the Jews and waking them up and to show them this is the reason why the first temple was destroyed. You want to hear more about Cyrus? This is important. Go to Chronicles. So go to the beginning of the book of Ezra. V'chula, drink the Torah, fill yourself up with Tanakh, the words of our prophets of blessed memory, and thank you so much for your thoughtful question.
All right, very good. We've got another caller on hold. Caller, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from.
Good morning. My name is Graylin James, and I'm from Louisiana.
Welcome to the show. What's the question for Rabbi?
Thanks. Thank you for taking my call, William, and good morning, Rabbi.
Certainly.
I had a question about Numbers 15, about fringes or tidzit. I'm kind of confused on, like, how are we supposed to wear them? And, like, on one of the biggest questions I had was, like, why is it a ribbon of blue? Like, is blue, like, Hashem's favorite color? Or, like, why didn't he pick purple or something like that? So that was my question I had.
Gotcha. So are you Jewish?
Yes, correct.
Cool. Okay, very good. We'll get this right up.
Yeah, I'm just crossing over from Christianity, so I'm still learning as I go.
Gotcha.
William, I was the one who had all of the books from Rabbi, and you sent them to me.
Oh, awesome. So are you in the process of a conversion right now?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Very cool. Okay.
So
well,
I'm still just trying to learn right now.
that's perfectly fine. Yeah, that's a great question too, by the way. Thank you. We'll get this answer right away.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, thanks.
All right.
So the Torah, thank you for your question. The Torah actually doesn't explicitly convey this. There are many views on what the fringes, what the blue thread, what's called the tcheles, conveys. So the tcheles, as it turns out, is not just any blue, but it's a muted blue. It's a muted blue. Today there's a return of the tcheles, and so the blue, I don't know if you can see it against my hand, is a muted blue. It's not this strong royal blue, but and that's very similar to the heavens, to the sky. You can always tell if a photograph is oversaturated because it just looks too blue. So the key is to remember, just a thought to keep in mind, there's not one but many thoughts that can be conveyed. But number one is we're told not only to have fringes, but to gaze upon them, to think about the mitzvahs of the Torah. And of course, if you think about the mitzvahs of the Torah, you want to know that its source is heaven. Its source is the heavens. It's interesting, the sky is not really blue, but it appears that way because of a physical phenomena. We find in Tanakh many cases where the Jews needed a reminder that it's all from heaven. In the case of when the Jews were being attacked by snakes, so in the wilderness, so Hashem put up a brazen snake, and they looked up, and of course they saw the sky behind the snake, and it reminded them, the source of it is not snakes going crazy, but the source of this is really from heaven. So think of the blue color as a color that reminds you of heaven, and that's why there is a lot of actually fake blue thread on Tzitzis. I'm sure you can buy it on Amazon. I haven't looked. I'm sure you can. But you can always tell the fake blue is because they're just too blue. It's like deep blue. So all those like royal blues, all that is fake stuff. The real, I'm not going to go through it now, and maybe one day I'll interview the fellow who discovered the tcheles that we now have, because we haven't had it for a very, very long time, and the marine animal from which it's derived. But one of the problems they were having is when they first discovered the creature, the marine animal that produced the dye, the color that it was producing the blue was too dark. And I don't want to tell his story for him, but they couldn't figure it out because they thought they nailed it with this creature. It was in the right place, it had the right feed, whatever it was. The problem was that the dye that was produced by this marine animal was just too blue. And the sky isn't that blue. It's blue, but not so blue, right? So it has to, in some way, match the sky. So it's a very interesting story that happened. They were, I don't remember, it was Herzliya, so they were in some coastal town near the Mediterranean, and where they had collected these creatures and had assembled them, and they're trying to solve. I think we got it, but just the blue is just too strong. Certainly doesn't match the muted blue that it should be. What happens? So as it turns out, they're in a room filled with dead marine animals. Well, what do you think happens in a room filled with dead marine animals? It starts to stink. It starts to smell really bad. So they open the windows so that they can get some cross ventilation. And what happens in the process is the sunlight then bears down on the pigment. And as a result of it being exposed to the sunlight, the intensity of the blue just recedes into the muted blue they were looking for. Sheer accident, or maybe it was the hand of Hashem. So as it turns out, because they were just trying to air out the room, the sunlight inadvertently was allowed in. The sunlight bearing down on the dye changed its color, and as a result, they go, aha, now we found it. That's the modern story of discovery of the light blue thread. There are other sources for light blue thread, but the ones that are, I'm not saying there's a consensus, but let's just use the word because I can't find a better word, is wonderful. The fellow's name, who I'm talking about, is Baruch Sturman. I actually grew up with him a long, long time ago. A long time ago. Am I telling a bedtime story? I grew up with him as a kid, so he was involved in this, and I think Dr. Greenspan were involved in this discovery in literally recent years. And in Eretz Yisrael, it's very popular. But whenever you see a person going around with a blue color, and the blue just doesn't look anything like the sky, nothing. Why? Because it's too blue. It's too dark. It's it's like it's like that. This is a hard drive. It's whatever. Like I'm just gonna pull this out. This like this kind of ridiculous blue, right? So whatever that is, periwinkle blue. I just made that up, but that's not. The sky isn't that blue. You'd have to Photoshop it together. So there's your answer. So that's what you should think about. You think about the tzitzis, you should think about heaven. In fact, the reason why there are 5 knots and so many strings, it's all about heaven. And that's what I would, if I were you, that's what I would be thinking about. Thank you very much for your question.
Excellent. All right, we'll move on. Caller, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from. Nope, sorry.
Good morning. Shalom, Rabbi. This is Beth in St. Louis. I enjoyed listening to your descriptions of blue. That was really, I enjoyed that. I wasn't expecting to hear about that this morning. My question is about all of the different religions that are out there. You are very blessed to be born Jewish, because I'm not saying that all Jews immediately are born, knowing who Hashem is, but I mean, your access you're Jewish, so obviously you're going to be led in that direction much more quickly or easily than a non-Jew such as myself. And so when you're not Jewish, there's all different weird kinds of Christianity, not to mention other religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, whatever. It does seem like Jesus was interested in introducing Hashem to non-Jews. Before Jesus, was there an effort, was there an emphasis, was there a focus on maybe not proselytizing, but, when you're raised in the Christian church, you're told your whole life, you got to get out there and witness. Go out there and witness. Be a witness. It's just, you hear it so often, it's just background noise after a while. Mm-hmm. And I do I'm like, okay, well, I guess that was a good thing. At least he wanted people that are non-Jews, such as myself, because when you're not born Jewish, it's like, wow, well, what am I supposed to do? Some people are raised in a very strict Catholic family or a very strict Baptist family, and they end up following that. But I don't know. I'm not in any way criticizing or putting down the way Judaism reaches out to non-Jews. Maybe they do, or maybe I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is. But I can definitely.
So would your question be something in the lines of, is it a practice of Judaism to try to proselytize or to witness?
Yeah, I guess so.
What's your question? What are you really asking?
Is it an emphasis? Is it something that is like, you've never been to church, so you would not know this, but church people, Oh, they have meetings.
Actually
They
have,
have
unfortunately. But
organizations. They're like, okay, we got the message out there, guys.
Yeah.
What are we going to do? What's going to be our strategy? I mean, I saw, Rabbi, I saw you in Jerusalem, and I mean, you saw how you were descended upon by all of these organizations trying to, with their banners and with, I mean, it gets to be a spectacle.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not in any way saying that that's what, Judaism should be doing. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying to go out there and make a spectacle of yourself with signs and banners and parades and, and I don't.
So I'm gonna kind of refine what I think you're asking, and I'm gonna first I'm gonna say this. Yeah. So, what are the Jews doing to be a light to the nation? What does that mean? Does it mean are they supposed to be?
I guess yes, that's a good way to.
Yeah, but he's also asking contradistinction to Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. Yeah,
okay.
That too.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, well, go ahead and hang up now, and you can tune in for your answer. Okay.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. All right, Rabbi.
Well, it's very. This probably comes as a surprise. Well, as it turns out, if we read the plain text of the Gospels, you find things that I thought were utterly hideous, where throughout the Gospels, prior to the crucifixion, the message was that this is only for Jews and not for Gentiles. In fact, in Matthew chapter 10, verse 5 and 6, Jesus instructs the 12 disciples, go not into the way of the Gentiles. That means don't go where the non-Jews are. And the city of the Samaritans enter you not. Like, don't go where the the Samaritans are. Because the Samaritans are Goyim. The history of the Samaritans are not relevant now. They're just not Jews. Okay? But only go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. I didn't make that up, and I didn't sneak into the house and shove that into your book of Matthew. It's there. Moreover, in both Mark chapter 7 and in Matthew chapter 15, we have even a more, I'm going to say this is really disturbing. We have a Gentile woman whose daughter has a devil in her, okay? And this explicit, I mean, go to Mark 7:26. I mean, just so you know, I'm not saying anything here to be provocative. Just she wanted Jesus to help her, and Jesus would have nothing to do with that event, with nothing to do with it. She then runs to the disciples with her daughter vexed with the devil, and the disciples run back to Jesus and says, get this lady away from her. And just right now, take my word for it, but go to the text. It makes it very clear she's not Jewish. Okay? And Jesus then says to her, it is not right to give the bread that belongs to the children to dogs. Dogs are very interesting here, because dogs is a creature that generally becomes part of a family but really isn't. That, people refer to my dog as like my child, but the dog really isn't your kid. I mean, but it isn't. So that's the Gentile equating with dogs is a little sophisticated. You might think of your dog as your kid, but ultimately your dog is an animal. So therefore, the Jews and the Jews alone are the ones that are worthy of the blessings, and dogs don't get that. They don't receive the blessing. If you don't have a Christian Bible near you, well, I guess you just have to take my word for it. It's there. This Gentile woman, instead of responding back and says, come on, give me a break. Or, but I am created in the image of God. Because if someone who wasn't Jewish came to me and asked me for help, which happens every day, I don't go say, oh, you're not Jewish. I sit and I help that person. And people who know me know I do that. I don't send people away because they're not Jewish. Never. And Jesus responds, we are told. Now, whether this conversation happened or not, I don't know, but why would someone make it up? And Jesus says, but it's not right to take the children's bread and give it to dogs. That means the dog, if you have a dog, one of the problems you deal with is if you turn your back for a second and you've got roast beef on the table, the dog is going to make his way to the table and you just start screaming, Spot, get off the table, and dog runs. But that food on the table is only for human beings. And if you're a Gentile, you're not a human being. You may look like human beings, you may look like the rest of us, but you ain't. Okay, now, the woman, this is quoting from the Christian Bible. The woman then responds back to Jesus. So she's being sent away a lot. And she says, but don't dogs eat from the crumbs that fall from the master's table? So if you have, again, let's go back to our story. You have a dog at home, and I'm sure quite a number of you do. But what happens when you're eating dinner? The dog has a nose, and that nose knows. And the dog is there. And what happens when you're eating and a piece of chicken falls off the table? That dog is all over it. Okay? So dogs eat from the food that falls off the end of the table, right? That's her response. So she acknowledges her status as a dog. And then Jesus then goes on, we're told to heal the daughter. Now, whatever. But the message here is that Gentiles are dogs and they're unworthy of the blessings and don't go and preach. I'm quoting from the Christian Bible. Now, what happens, the theology that's being advanced here in a way that I think some people would find to be grotesque, is that that's what the crucifixion accomplished. In that, once Jesus was crucified and died, so the veil of partition that separates in the temple those who can go into the most holy parts and those who cannot was rent asunder at the cross, torn in half. And that's, although historically that didn't happen, whatever, it's not recorded anywhere. What is the reason it's there is to say that the division between Jew and Gentile has been torn in half, and now go into all nations, Matthew 28, verse 19, and baptize them in the name of the Father, the Spirit, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. So the Christian Bible is not portraying Jesus' life ministry as one that was made for non-Jews, but rather, because that's what, I don't believe the story actually happened, but whoever wrote this book, it's unlikely. They just go, let's just throw in this story that portrays Jesus as just having no feeling for non-Jews whatsoever, and we'll just invent that. It's a little embarrassing. So one could, if using the rigorous criteria of embarrassment, it's hard to imagine that Jesus was running around happily healing everybody or helping everybody, and someone just came along, let's advance Christianity and make it more attractive and just say, Jesus really wasn't into helping non-Jews. Could be not, I don't know. But the methodology, the rigorous methodology used to untangle what likely happened doesn't seem to be pointing in that direction. Next. We follow what HaKadosh Baruch Hu teaches us. So it's true, logically speaking, it makes sense. If men were writing a Torah, chas v'chalila, who were not inspired by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who were not prophets, but they were making it up, if I was inventing a religion, I would do exactly what Christianity eventually winds up doing, and that is to go saying we have to convert everybody to Christianity. I would want everyone to join my group. And the Most logical thing is to do what the Mormons do, knock on everyone's door, what the witnesses do, what the church did, what the Crusaders did. That's logical. I mean, not kill everybody, but but as it turns out, the Tanakh was not written by men, meaning it was recorded by men. It was transmitted by men, but it's the word of Hashem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to us, let me explain to you how we're going to get rid of the darkness. Imagine a room that's completely dark. All the windows are shut, sealed, covered, the door, and you can't see your finger in front of you. Imagine you're in a room like that. In the old days, when you had film that you wanted to process, you couldn't have any light in the room unless it was a special light that the film wasn't sensitive to. Now imagine you're in a room that's completely dark and you illuminate one candle. Imagine how much darkness it recedes, disappears as a result of that one light. It's very tremendous. And that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, look, I know you have your ways of doing it. I know, and you look at all these religions in the world, all running around, telling them to convert and putting up posts. Torah says, look, this is how you're going to do it. You're going to be loyal to the Torah, and as a result, the nations of the world will get it. And they're going to become exposed to you and to the Torah. This is prophesied explicitly in Deuteronomy chapter 4. That your Torah, that this law that you have, oh, what a wise nation that has such a Torah. As it turns out, that all the nations of the world, just about from one end of the world to the other, they know there's an idea that these Jews have a law, have a Torah. They might reject it. They may say it's corrupt. Whatever it is, they may, like some people, I don't believe. They know it. And everybody knows about the Jews. Believe me, everybody knows about the Jews. I've been to the very ends of the earth. I've been to the furthest most islands in the world. I've really been there. They all know about the Jews, and they all know about the Torah. Whether they experience you as a person and are transformed, you have to do your job. You have to, the Jew means when a Jew says Kriya Shema, the nations of the world are affected deeply by that. I could tell you a story, but it's a little late in the show. But I could tell you now that when a Jew keeps Torah, the nations are uplifted from that if they allow the light to enter into their heart. That's all. And the question for the nations of the world is, will you allow the light that's knocking at the door into your heart? Hopefully the Klal Yisrael, the Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, many of them are today, Baruch Hashem. There's wonderful things happening in the Jewish world. And the Jews are today allowed to keep the Torah without interference from the nations of the world. Not everywhere, but in most places. And as a result, look what's happening. In the past, hundreds of years ago, Jews were repressed. They weren't allowed to keep the Torah. They had to do it in secret. They weren't allowed to observe it. It had a devastating effect on Goyim because they weren't getting the light, the Shefa. But now the light's going all over. And what's happening? Look around you, kid. Listen up, sweethearts. It's mamish an unbelievable thing. Literally, we're living in a time today where Jews are able to observe the Torah, keep so many mitzvahs that are tluya ba'aretz, that are connected to the land of Israel. And today, the non-Jewish world, they're kicking the door down to get in. The complaint is, why is it so hard to convert? What do? I live out in Australia, so far away from an Orthodox synagogue. What can I do? It's affecting the world in such a profound way that the Christians, who are still, many of them are stiff-necked, some of them are repenting. When I say some, it's in the hundreds of thousands. I don't even know how many. They're already introducing Hebrew into their churches, and more Jewish in the church. I see this thing; it looks crazy, but you have pastors coming out with taluses on and all these things. Why? Because they know it's out there and the vibrations are there. Why? Because Jews today are keeping Torah as never before. Since you'd have to go back all the way to the days of Chizkiyahu HaMelech. You'd have to go back a very long time in history. And so we have our way, what I think is a good way. Like it used to be when I was a little kid, there would be salesmen who would come to the door and want to sell an encyclopedia or a vacuum cleaner. My parents would say, no, thank you. It's logical. If you're selling vacuum cleaners or encyclopedias, you have to knock on every door, and hopefully you'll get a sale. This is if men are inventing sales. But if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, this is how you're going to spread it, you keep it, and Kiner Mitzvah Torah. The mitzvah is the candle, and the Torah is the light. And therefore, this is Hashem's way. And Hashem is the Borei Olam. He's the creator of the universe. He's the Manig. He is the one who leads the world. He's the creator of the world. He's the Bashefa Zisa, the sweet creator. And then Hashem will always say, look, this is how I want you to do it. I know you think you're such a smarty pants and you should do it like this. Those are all man-made religions. Do it the way I tell you. Now, there were instances, it's true, where you had unique events in history, where Jonah was sent out to Nineveh. Hashem wanted to make a point with that. We see that at the end of the book of Jonah. It's very moving. But that's not a mitzvah on everyone. Now, you want to go question how Hashem says we should do it? You could do that, but it's much wiser to follow what it says in the Torah. In Exodus chapter 19, the Jews are, the Klal Yisrael are called an Am Segula, a unique nation, chosen, and they are a nation that is a Mamleches Kohanim v'Goy Kodesh, which means a kingdom of priests. Now, if the Klal Yisrael are given the mandate to be the priests of the world, then who are the congregants? Who are the people? So it's the nations of the world. In case you think I made this up, Torah says there, in only two places Torah says, Ki li kol haaretz, the whole world belongs to me. So forget about all this Christian stuff. The key is go out and follow what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says. Do this way. This is the way that brings the world, brings light to the world. You think you should do what people who sell encyclopedias do? Don't do that. They're not going to get it, not going to get it right. It has to be done in this manner. Thank you for your question.
All right, moving on. Okay, just want to let the callers know. I get about 8 to 10 calls in between while someone's actually on hold. And if you get directed to voicemail, definitely leave your question on a voicemail, and that'll give us a chance to actually review it later, because not everybody can get in because there's just too many calls that come in. I can only take one call at a time. So anyway, we'll go ahead and take this caller. Caller, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Yes, hi. Are you answering my call?
I am. You are live on the air.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Sure.
My question was about this Shabbat. I was reading something very Midrash, and it got me very confused. It's about the death of Esav. Up until now, I thought that the Gemara teaches that the death of Esav happened by the Machpelah, where his head, I don't know by the son of which one of the fathers, whether they get decapitated, and then his head rolls into the Machpelah. Right. And that's what I learned in the yeshiva and everything. But the other day when I was learning the Midrash, I came across an explanation that that's not how it happened, and Esav died trying to attack Yaakov in a cave, and then Yehuda goes and kills him. And this confused me, but what confused me even more was when I started reading the commentary, how there's a rabbi, I don't remember his name, he tried to connect the two and saying that when he got decapitated, I guess he didn't get fully decapitated, and he got hurt, and Yehuda finished the job in the cave. But this is very confusing because the two explanations are almost cannot even be related, because in one of them Yaakov is dead, and in the other one Yaakov is alive. And what's more, when Esav gets quote-unquote decapitated, Yaakov is already dead, but then the rabbi explains that he got hurt, and then later on when Esav tried to kill Yaakov, Yehuda kills him. But how could that happen? If Yaakov is already dead, how could... So this got me very, very confused.
Okay.
And my question is, how did this really happen? How is this related? How did two gets related, and how is this...
All right. Thank you for your question. Thank you for your question.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So the question is, what is being conveyed in the Medrash, in the Targum Yonason, in Genesis, and in Genesis chapter 50? What is being conveyed is that Esav's head alone was buried in the tomb of the patriarchs. The Medrash is not necessarily interested in conveying whether Esav died immediately from the first blow or not. What is being conveyed is that Esav, unlike Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah, Leah, and Rebekah, who were thoroughly integrated people, Esav was thoroughly unintegrated. His head was separated completely from his body, and he never succeeded at elevating his body from his mind, and he was a complete failure. And that's what's being conveyed. I confess I didn't get everything that you were saying. I kind of lost direction on that. But what the Medrash wants us to know is that Esav was a complete failure in his life. And what makes someone successful is if they're able to take the physical and raise it up to the spiritual. Avram was successful at that task, and so was Isaac and Jacob. Esav was a complete failure. All of us face the challenge of can we elevate the physical world into the spiritual realm during our lives? The physical is holy if it's used properly as a tool to raise up the spiritual. And the parable, whether it's to be taken in a hyper-literal way or it's a metaphor, to what extent it's a metaphor, the key message is that Esav was the extreme failure in this sense. He utterly failed and integrated the physical and the spiritual, and therefore only his head is buried in the tomb of the patriarchs. There is one medrash that says that his head sort of rolled into the next to Isaac, but I didn't get all your sources on that. But anyways, I hope that answers some of your question. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, we'll move on to the next caller. Caller, welcome to the show. You're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from. Caller, you're live on the air. Can you hear me okay? So prepare yourselves to hold literally up to 20, 30, 40 minutes, however long it takes. And also, if you step away from your phone and you're watching us live, you might miss your opportunity. So, caller, can you hear me? Are you live? All right, I'm going to take another call. Caller, welcome to the show. Please tell us your name. Where are you calling from? Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Oh, yeah, you're live on the air.
There you are. Let me turn this off.
No problem.
Shalom, William, and shalom, Rabbi Singer.
Greetings.
Baruch Hashem. I have a question. So let's talk about King David of blessed memory, and thanks be to Hashem for him. He's lifted my soul quite a bit. So my question is, why was King David mandated to write Psalms? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question.
And what part of heaven did you fall out of? That's a very, very exquisite question. Wow. So I waited how many years for that question? I don't know. Many, many years. Why was David HaMelech given the prophecies to author the book of Psalms? After all, he's the primary author, not the only. After all, many other prophets could have done it. Wow. Wow, you kind of took my breath away on that question. So the answer to that question lies in what it was the primary purpose of Sefer Tehillim. What was the central feature? What was the purpose of the Book of Psalms? What was its primary purpose? And the answer is, it was the liturgy that was to be read and sung in the Beis Hamikdash. In fact, that's the name of Psalms. It's called Psalms. It all means song. Mizmor LeDavid, a song. Well, who's singing? Why do I need music for? Why does everything need music? Who's singing? You have other, maybe wisdom literature. They're not called songs. Why are these songs? Because as it turns out, that David HaMelech was given the mandate to write the liturgy that the Levium would recite in the Beis Hamikdash. That was the most important thing. Now, the question is why David was given such a mandate. And the answer is that David HaMelech, as it turns out, prepares everything for the Beis Hamikdash. It's really quite elegant. So, as it turns out, David HaMelech could not build the temple. He asked to build it, and initially, blow your mind away, a prophet who was not receiving prophecy said, "Go for it." Paraphrasing 2 Samuel chapter 7, right from the beginning. David asked the prophet, now I've taken care of everything, defeated the Philistines. We need a place for the ark. And the answer is, he's told, go build it. Right away, HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to the prophet, because the prophet was responding based on what made sense to him. He was not receiving prophecy at that moment. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu came right to the prophet Nathan and said, "Oh, stop. Hold it. He can build it. Can't build it." We're told in Novi why he can't build it. He engaged in wars. His hands had blood on it. Ultimately, it would be King Solomon. But David, despite the fact that he was prevented from actually building the first Beis Hamikdash, he was given everything but. In fact, we often talk about David who built the sukkah, and it's the sukkah of David. We often talk about it as like David practically made it, because he did just about everything for it. That means he is the one who settled and liberated Yerushalayim. He is the one that made sure that we had the threshing floor and paid good money for it. He arranged and made sure that the materials necessary for the Beis Hamikdash would be brought in. That task will be continued by Shlomo HaMelech. And he wrote the liturgy that would be sung in the Beis Hamikdash. And this is the primary reason why David was given such a task. That's a really wonderful question. I waited like 40 years for someone to ask that question. There's another thing about David HaMelech that's very unique. So, the Sefer Tehillim is not monolithic. It's actually divided into 5 major sections. A major part of Sefer Tehillim addresses the issue of suffering and from enemies, and despite all that, I will not lose my faith in Hashem. And there were different people who had different challenges in their lives personally, and accordingly were given a mandate to write a sefer that they uniquely could convey. King Solomon was the wealthiest man who ever lived. He was the wisest man who ever lived. He was given a mandate to write the parts of the Kesuvim, namely Shir Hashirim, the book of Proverbs, Mishlei, Koheles, Ecclesiastes. Who could better understand what it's like to have everything and what matters at the end of the day? What's really important? Now, as it turns out, David HaMelech suffered tremendous Yisurim in his life. He really had enemies on all sides. He had the man who he served, who turned out to be would wind up being his father-in-law, and his predecessor, Shaul. He spent a great deal of his life trying not to get himself killed. He had a son that wanted to kill him. I mean, if you think you have problems in your life, if you think your problem is my son hasn't called me in 3 weeks, imagine having a son that wants to kill you. This is it. And sometimes David HaMelech is praying to God and he's not getting an answer. He says those words at the beginning of Psalm 22. He asked Hashem, you answered my ancestors, but me, I'm not hearing anything. He cries out to Hashem. He uses the metaphor of wild animals, bulls, dogs. This is not your little dog. These are wild dogs. And lions are all around me. They want to destroy me. He endured the pain of being mocked. Anyone ever embarrassed you in your life publicly? That is probably one of the most painful things you can experience is betrayal and being publicly just embarrassed. I mean, if I asked you to think back in your life of what stories you can remember like they were yesterday, just replay the movie. You were 7 years old, and you might not remember a phone number you heard 30 seconds ago, but you remember the feeling of humiliation. You recall the feeling of utter betrayal, like it was yesterday. And it's one of the most haunting thoughts. Now, why? But yet, you probably forgot times where you were on a bicycle as a kid and busted your leg up, and it was, I'm sure, very painful. And it's like your friend had, do you remember when you did it? Oh, I forgot that. So physical pain in the spectrum of what suffering is really minor compared to emotional pain. And who are the people that really have the power to hurt us? As much as you might fear the IRS, it's that have hurt you the most, afflicted you with the greatest amount of agony in your life. Okay? So as it turns out, that David HaMelech was uniquely qualified to write a sefer devoted to many things, including, I have suffered greatly. There are times when I just did not understand where God is. My enemies, they're all about me. For dogs have surrounded me, a company of evildoers. They're all about me. Like a lion, they're at my hands and my feet. The church will change that text to put, they pierced my hands and feet, because they want Jesus in there. They're going to have Jesus saying those things. Jesus isn't talking, because David HaMelech is speaking in the first person about himself in the past tense. This happened to me. And where are we going with all this? Psalm 23. If there's any chapter in the Bible that you know by heart, Mizmor LeDavid, Mizmor LeDavid, the Lord is my shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd is the explosion from 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 to 2. David is recounting, frequently using the imagery of wild, dangerous animals, as all of his enemies have mocked him. A wife of his mocked him. I mean, this is the stuff that remains our constant companion all of our lives, and that is the pain that others have inflicted on us emotionally. And yet, David, Olav Shalom, David, this great Novi of Hashem, was able to say, you know what? This place I'm walking in, I'm not on top of a mountain, I'm in a valley. And I'm not only low down, but there's a shadow all over, and it's death. But Shiftecha v'shantecha hemo yinachmuni. Your rod and your staff, they all comfort me. I know that you are going to keep your promise. You have put before me a table that's completely set. You will deliver my enemies. Ultimately, all this suffering is to get us somewhere that's holy. So therefore, David HaMelech was in a unique position because of his experience to not only transmit prophecy, but to have it go through the filter of a person who genuinely experienced it. And King David had good reason to take revenge against his enemies. He could have killed Saul when Saul went into a cave when David was hiding there. He didn't kill him because he was anointed. He didn't exploit the situation. And when David hears from the guy who proudly says he had Saul, his implacable enemy at that point, destroyed, King David killed the guy for bragging about it. Okay? That means that he did not seek to take vengeance against a man who sought to kill him because he was God's anointed. This is, my friends, a man, David HaMelech is really a man of the highest order. And it's because he's such a man, and when I say the word man, I mean such a person who we can really feel, because I know what it's like to be betrayed. And I know what it's like to be in a terrible predicament. And those who you thought would stand by you were not there. And I know what it's like to be publicly mocked and humiliated. And I know what it's like to speak in the darkest place and wonder, do you hear me? I know you heard my ancestors. My friends, read Psalm 22. I know the church has misappropriated this chapter. I hate to bring that in, but you need to know it. And what they do is, David HaMelech is speaking about himself because of what happened in his life. And if you're not familiar with Sefer Shmuel, if you're not familiar with the book of Samuel in particular, then much of the book of Tehillim is going to be, you're not sure what he's talking about. So I've just shared with you two reasons why David HaMelech is given the mandate to write the Sefer that conveys what to do with a spiritual conundrum that is so traumatic in your life. Thank you for your question.
All right, Rabbi, looks like we're out of time. So thank you all for tuning in. If you don't have Rabbi's books, let's get biblical. I keep wanting to call it Q&A. That's what we do. Let's get biblical. It's a 2-volume book set available online. Let me just flash this one more time just so you can get a good look at it. The audio, the CDs aren't in print anymore, but the audio files are available. If you go to outreachjudaism.org, and just click on the free audio, and you'll find all the files that actually make up these CDs, and they complement the books. It's not the book on CD. It's actually extra information. So if you don't have it, you can't get the CDs anymore, but you can definitely get the files. So outreachjudaism.org, just click on the tab that says free audio, and that'll get you right there. All right, Rabbi. Well, thank you for all your work and your dedication for sure. It's good to have these teachings available, easy at your fingertips. Guys, if you're looking for a certain topic, just go to YouTube, type in your question and Tanakh Talk, or your question and Tovia Singer, and you're certainly to get something up there. The way the videos get labeled has a lot to do with it. So anyway, Rabbi, thanks again, and thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you same time, same place next week, Hashem willing. So you guys have a great week. Shabbat Tov. Bye.
חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה והכמיהה.
אני אתה אתם תמיד תמיד כולם ביחד, חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה והכמיהה.